Hey guys, so today I'm here with a video reviewing the Game Boy Light. So actually this is probably the rarest of all Game Boys, as it was only made in Japan for about a year, a little bit less than that, and they only ended up making about 11,000 of them. So at first glance, if you look at it, it looks very much like another Game Boy, the Game Boy Pocket. But as you can see here, there is a pretty big difference between them. The Game Boy Light, actually, let me just go ahead and pull this back a little bit. The Game Boy Light is actually quite a bit larger. Let me just set them on top of each other. As you can see here, the Game Boy Light is quite a bit larger, and it also is a good bit thicker due to the fact that instead of using AAA batteries, it uses two AA batteries. So the Game Boy Light, though, there was one major thing that, well, obviously by the name, the major thing about the Game Boy Light was that it not only had, just the standard Game Boy play, but also did have a backlight, and I'll show you guys that in a second. Now this was actually, like I said, a really rare model, and it was actually for a good reason. So the Game Boy Light came out right about the time that the Game Boy Color came out. And obviously the Game Boy Color was the successor. It had a lot of additional features. It had color screen, better graphics, all that kind of stuff. And so the Game Boy Light really never took off. So basically they went ahead, they designed it, and they did launch it in Japan. And it really just didn't do that well, because obviously who would buy, spend this on a Game Boy that's been out for, this plays the standard Game Boy games, which have been out for almost 10 years by then. Or you could buy, obviously buy the brand new Game Boy Color. However, these are still pretty cool little, pretty cool Game Boys, and obviously the backlight, which is a pretty nice feature, because obviously no Game Boys actually had a backlight until the Game Boy Advance SP, which was back in 2003. So I'll go ahead and just give you guys a quick tour of it. And of course this one is not in perfect condition, but like I said, these are pretty hard to come by, so if you can get one brand new in the box, they will cost you a ridiculous amount. So up at the top you actually see one of the first things is that the switch is actually a little bit different. So you turn it off, you can turn it on, and then if you flip it all the way over to the right, you actually turn it on with the backlight on. So I'll show you guys that. I'll shut the light and show you guys that in just a second. About the standard same size screen as the Game Boy Pocket, and of course the same buttons and plastic. Over here we do have the Game Boy link port as well as the volume, and we have just the standard contrast of any standard sort of Game Boy, and of course the power switch. Now we flip it over on the back, and actually I do have a Japanese Yoshi game in here, which I'll show you guys in a second, but we do have just all the standard sort of stuff telling about it, and it does take two AA rather than two AAA batteries. So, that was, obviously it had to power the backlit screen, so, that's not bad. Although it did kind of protrude a little bit. And although actually a lot of people, if you look at just pictures of it, the Game Boy Light looks pretty much identical to the Game Boy Pocket, but it actually it is different. It is bigger in pretty much all dimensions. It's a little bit thicker, a little bit longer, a little bit wider and everything, so it's pretty interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and shut the light and show you guys what the backlight looks like. So one major thing about Game Boys was that obviously in the dark you really couldn't see. So this is just without the light off, this is just what any Game Boy would look like, and you can't see anything. But if we go ahead and turn on the backlight, voila, we actually do have a pretty decent light on here. So the camera is actually not quite picking up. It's a little bit greener than this, but it's absolutely playable. It's nowhere near as bright as, say, the Game Boy Advance SP, for example, but it is absolutely playable. You can actually go ahead and see it really nicely, and it actually works. Now the battery life on the Game Boy Light was actually not too bad, of course, because it was, instead of using AAAs, it used AAs. It had about the same battery life even with the light on, and with the light off it actually lasted, I believe, about 3 or 4 hours longer. So as you guys can see, the screen's pretty nice. Of course you do have the contrast, so just like on any standard Game Boy, you can go ahead and adjust the contrast however you like. It's just a really solid package. I like it. Now, obviously, the major reason you would want a Game Boy Light these days is just for collecting purposes. As obviously, like I said, the Game Boy Advance SP does have a far superior backlight. But these are really cool little Game Boys to kind of have. Like I said, they're really rare, and so for nerds like me who like to collect Game Boys, it's just something I wanted to have. So there you go, guys. That is my review of the Game Boy Light. Now this actually did come in 2 different colors. It did come in this gold as well as it came in a silver color. Now if you're interested in getting one of these, eBay is probably going to be your best bet. You really don't find them pretty much anywhere outside of Japan unless, if you do find one outside Japan, they're probably going to be marked up quite a bit more. But in general, these are not cheap at all. You're going to have to probably spend a decent amount of money to go ahead and get one. This one's not in great condition, but obviously it does work. One thing that you do definitely want to look out for when buying one of these, especially if you're going to spend a bunch of money, is make sure that the backlit screen does work. That is a huge thing. Obviously, it's not a Game Boy Light unless the screen actually lights up. But anyway, guys, that's my review of the Game Boy Light. It's a pretty cool Game Boy, really one of those rare ones that you never see these days, and most people never even heard of. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching.